it applies to the product. And so give us just another minute and we're going to go ahead and jump in. All right, thank you all for joining us today for Dropsource Low-Code in 45. I'm Rebecca Dotson, I'm the Digital Marketing Manager, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. Before we get started, let me introduce you to our panelists that you'll see. They will be answering our questions in the Q&A section. So again, that Q&A section can be found on your screen. Drop in any questions you might have there, and we will answer them. We'll answer some of them live, and then we'll have a time at the end of the webinar demo to take questions then. So in our panelists, we have our CTO and co-founder, Nate Frechette. We have our VP of Sales, Morris Porter, and we have our VP of Marketing, Will Bernhold. And we are excited to give you an official demo of Dropsource today. Before we jump into our demo, I kind of want to discuss low-code. So a lot of people are finding that mobile apps are very difficult to build. Mobile apps are really something that a lot of organizations are driving for to kind of assist with their digital transformation and expand their digital experience and presence. So low-code really kind of helps organizations overcome these challenges. And so as you can see on our screen, some of the challenges are lack of technical experience, resource constraints, and demand is very high, as we just said. And so low-code platforms have been a big assistance to a lot of organizations to kind of be the forefront into the mobile frontier. And so for those of you who have not heard of Dropsource before, might be new to our platform and product, wanted to mention our inclusion in the latest Forrester Wave report for mobile low-code platforms. Dropsource received the highest possible score in the criteria of collaboration and mobile client support, analytics, and app store support, and asset sharing. And you'll see more of what our community members love about our platform in today's demo. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce you to Wade Sellers, our developer support specialist, who will walk you through using Dropsource to build truly native business apps.
Cool. So starting back over here, I am showing you a screen of our Dropsource dashboard. So essentially this is the starting point to get into the editor. This is where all your projects are laid out, and then you would hit open editor to open one of them up. Before you have any projects though, this would be a blank screen, and to create a new project, you would go ahead and click the create new project. And then you'd see we have routes for iOS and Android. So again, we use native frameworks and our native classes that we have to build Swift and Android apps using our editors. So by choosing either one, you are going to go down that path and see those native elements, which I'll show you in just a bit. But if you clicked iOS, you'd slide in here. You get a couple templates that you can start out with, or you can start out with just a blank canvas ready to start. You'd hit next, and then you'd just give your project a name. And that name would just be associated with the Dropsource project that you would see in your dashboard. So once you've created a project, you'd start seeing them in here in this tile. And I've got one pre-open, but it's the webinar demo that I'm going to show you here. I'm going to slide this down once I get that window hidden. Okay, good deal. Everybody still see my projects? Good. We still good to go?
Yes, we're good.
Okay, good deal. Cool. So now I'm inside of the editor. I have this this project that I'm going to show you, and essentially what our demo app is. You can think of this app as a local sales application that could be used by a business's sales team to like manage their clients, get details on the clients, find directions to the client, and even submit new clients, into the database. What you're looking at right here is the landing page for that screen. And getting into it just a little bit is when you come to mobile apps, and especially in the Dropsource ecosystem, things are called pages for us. So one single screen on the app, one chunked functionality would be a page. So in this app, you'll see I have 4 pages. On the left-hand side, I have a page list. You'll see the landing page, which is the login page. The clients page, which would be like your first page you would go into after you've logged in, where you'd see a whole bunch of the different companies, the different clients. If you were to click on one, you'd slide into a details page where we would show a video here, and I'll show you that during the demo. a little bit of information on the client, and then even a map showing where they're at, and then the ability to go and get directions to that client from wherever you're at, wherever the user of this app is at in their device. And then lastly, a submission app. So if you were to submit a brand new lead into it, you could add their details in here and then submit that lead. So I'm going to show you just to kind of give you a basic layout of what's going on in Dropsource, how you navigate, and sort of how the menus are spanned out while I walk through the functionalities that we have built into this app. So again, I talked about the pages side. So we've got our page here. You can go ahead and open these up like a drawer, tile them in and out. I have the Elements tab, which is the next one that I'm going to get into. But before I do, I just want to show you how easy it is to create a new screen. So in that Pages screen, if I hit the plus, I can see that if I hover over it, it says create a page. If I create a page, I slide into a new page, and you'll see that I have tab bars and navigation bars, so I can set up the kind of the hierarchy of navigation through this app while I'm building out the page. If you've built mobile apps using code before, you'll understand that this is a very amazing time saver when it comes down to architecting out the navigation through the screens of your app. So in this case, I'm just going to show you a test page. So I'll leave those blank. I'll go ahead and hit next. And then all you have to do is just name your page. So I'll just go ahead and name this one test page, hit create. And that's it, just like that. I get a new page down here, a fresh screen to start adding things onto, and we just start right from there. So getting into the Pages tab here, you'll see that I have the new page. The next spot that we would hit would be our Elements page. So if I hit Elements, I start getting in here, and you'll see that I have a whole bunch of tools at my disposal, a whole bunch of elements at my disposal on the left in the Elements pane here. These are the native elements that Apple has written for us in their frameworks that give you the native code on the backside to build out these items, which is an amazing feat that we're able to pull these in. So for instance, if you wanted to add a button to this screen, you would just grab one, click it and drag it. Just drag it right in. And then we're very free form when it comes to how you can lay these out. Nothing has to sit in its own box and things like that, but you also have the ability to just free form, make the button bigger. You can go ahead and grab an activity indicator if you wanted to and slide that right in place. You could go ahead and take a text field, for instance, and bring a text field up. Maybe you were building up that login screen. And at that point, you start lining up your elements. Once you start getting your elements kind of lined up in the basic spot where they're at, you can start styling those elements. So what's really cool is once you start pulling in elements, you go over to the Styles tab here, you'll see that I have the text field selected. You'll see over here, you'll see the little paint canvas right there. Text field is what's highlighted. And if I go to the Styles tab, you can see that I have options on the right-hand side to start making adjustments. So if I wanted to change the text that's in the text field right there, if I wanted to create placeholder text, so for instance, maybe I want them to type into it, but I might say, enter username, right? You can just drop it right in there. There's no code that you needed to do yet. If you want to change the background colors or even center the font or change the font, it's all located right inside. So once I start messing around with the text fields and the buttons and the other elements that I have at my disposal, the next thing you might want to do is start constraining things. So you're building out your UI, your UX, you're drag and dropping, you're setting up their sizes and their form factors, but then constraints are what essentially tell the device a little bit more rules of the road about how you want things set up. So for instance, if I were to highlight the text field username, and I go to the Constraints tab over here, you'll see the pane for constraints. Now, this is a new constraints feature that we've built out, and we've submitted a brand new constraints engine into the editor that's really helping people out. So for instance, if I wanted to center this element, and you know how phones are different screen sizes, I might want to set up things like proportional constraints. We can do that now in our constraints engine. So for instance, I have the text field set. I've used the guides to drop it, so essentially in the middle of the page, kind of help me out. You'll see that red line there as I'm dragging around. And this will help you out as you're moving it around different spots and try to understand exactly where you want to lay it. So if I lay it here, what you can start seeing is I have a left, a right, and even a center justification, so I can set constraints on the left and the right. And so if I wanted to center this element and also give it about 20% on both sides from the edge of the screen, no matter what the screen size was, I could go ahead and say, I want to set a constraint on the left and the right. Instead of pixels, maybe I want to do percentages, and I'll say, I want the text field to be 20% from the left and from the right. And what you'll notice is as I'm typing in new numbers here, the text field will actually stretch out a little bit and will readjust as I'm going along. So if you hit the 20 and hit tab, you'll see that it gained a little bit of size. You can even see that if I want to, for instance, 50% on the right-hand side, watch what happens to the text field. It'll go ahead and it'll shift over to that 50%. It gives it half of the screen width on the right-hand side. So if I want to center it, I would just give the same percentage on both sides. And now no matter what size that screen is, this text field will stay exactly where I want, 20% off of the sides of the screen. You can do the same when it comes to vertical constraints as well. And then you can just go through and you'll add these constraints up and eventually build your UI out of what you want to see. So just kind of going into a little bit more of what you would see in a full-fledged out page. If I go over to the landing page, you'll see that I have this right here. If I go ahead and check out these elements that I have here, you can see that the constraints, some are set in different ways and there's different strategies to go about it. You can see that this one looks centered, but truly what's going on is we've set 0 pixels here and then we've set the screen width by stretching out the element to the right-hand side and using the guides. So there's different ways that you can go about this to find success. To get into the next element here, we start adding into functionalities. So we've got our elements laid out. We are constraining them to the screen, and now we need to tell the app what to do when the user's interacting with these elements. So for instance, we use an event stream for that. So if I hit the button, the Login with Salesforce button, and I go over to Events tab, in the Events pane, you'll see that there's options of where I can get into and tell it to do something upon something happening. So with a tapped gesture, you can see that it says Manage, which means we already have functionality built into it. If I hit Manage, this is what happens when the login button's hit. And it's essentially telling you a story as you go down the list. So it was tapped. The first thing that happens is we're going to show a progress overlay. So that's that spinner that pops up. And then within that, you've got a lot of options. We can show it as a zoom in style, so it's closer to, so it's larger on screen. We can end up with some strings in there. It's telling it, hey, you're logging in. That's why it's thinking, things like that. And then fill out, just as in telling the stories by filling out the menu items instead of using code. Okay, so we have the spinner up there. So we're telling the user, hold on, we're logging in. Well, now we need to log in. So the next one is run the API request. And you'll see that the API request is a post request using the auth to and using a token in order to log the user in. If I close this out, and I'm going to get to this in just a moment, but I want to highlight on, if I go over to API, you'll see the login is right here. And if I tap on it, I can see, okay, I get responses. When I get a 200, so a positive response on login, you'll see that this is the data structure that's going to come back to me. The access token, IDs, dates, the token type. And if I go over to events, you can see when I get a 200 request, what do we want to happen? So if I hit manage here, you'll see when I get a positive request when I log in, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to save that token that we're getting because we're going to use that token for other requests. And then I also do a run API request here to verify that password. So that's just in functionality that works with to move our demo app forward. But essentially that once you get a request in, or I'm sorry, once you get a response in from your API request, you can start triggering other functionalities. Some of the other cool things with this is even when it comes to control flows and structuring, where you might say, well, how do I do like an if-else statement or something like that? What if it doesn't log in successfully or things like that? One of the good spots, or a good spot to show you where that would be in our demo app would be if I go to the clients page, which would essentially be like the first page if you go in and you've already logged the user in, you don't want to have them log in every time. You just want to take them right to that front page. So one thing that I want to show you here is if I have the clients page open and I go to the view hierarchy, I can see everything that's in there. So for instance, here's the page. If I highlight, this is the whole table view that shows the clients. Each one of those clients would be a cell. Inside that cell, you'd see a company image. So these are ways that you can get into the elements on the screen. If I go to the client's page, hit the paint, and go over to events, you'll see when the page is loaded, like right when it's loaded, I can check something out. So we do something here. If I hit manage, you'll see that I've got an if-else statement here. If I check the if-else statement, I can see what the logic is. If the device is logged in, so when I log the device in and I've got a login that's good to go and a token good to go, I take a device variable and I use a true-false boolean to set it as true. So you'll see right here. If I'm logged in successfully equals true, so if I am logged in, then go ahead and don't do anything. Like go ahead and keep loading that screen. We're fine. But if this is false, then you'll see right here that I have a false. If this statement's false, go to page, and then shift me over to that landing page because the user needs to log in again. And that's a really cool functionality that takes a decent amount of coding to be able to have that auto login style functionality that you get with a few windows and a couple logic statements built right in. So the next thought we got into is we've got our elements laid out. We've constrained them on screen. I've showed you some actions and events that you can do. The next thing is, where does this information come from on the outside? Well, we communicate through APIs. And what we have going on in here is we use the Open API Spec. Essentially, you have what's called a Swagger spec file that allows you to document in a human and machine readable style your API. So you set your requests up, your parameters are set up, you set up your response, what's expected to come back and what those data types are. And that's what Dropsource uses to understand how to go and retrieve data properly, how to code those API requests up and make sure that we have all the required parameters set up so that we have a successful response back without you having to write a line of code inside of the Dropsource editor. So what's going on here is if you have a new API, so let's say you have a backend database, you can use a tool like, for instance, Stoplight.io, which is a fantastic third-party tool that allows you to give the information of your API, write the information for your API, so giving the information that the backend is looking for, and then spit out this swagger.io spec file. And once you have that, that's the rules of the road for your API to get to the information on your backend. When you're going to input a new one, you would just go to the API tab anywhere in the editor, hit plus, and then you'll see that there's opportunities to drop it. We have some that are set up here as well. And then you can either use the URL that Stoplight.io gives you to add it in, or you can simply choose to upload that file and drop it right in. Once you drop it in, Dropsource starts doing magic on the back end to populate the API. So you'll see that when we dropped in the Salesforce authentication API in here, it starts producing this. You'll see I have a post request. I have the Google Auth request, and I can get into those and see more details on what's going on. And then when I go ahead and request an API, when I go ahead and make an API request and receive that response, since the Swagger.io also has the responses information, we know the structure of the data that's supposed to come back and what the parameters are called and the data types that they are, if they're strings or numbers or what have you, and we can start using those within our app. So to show a little bit more of what you could see from that would be, for instance, to go to the landing page. For instance, this is a good one I want to show you. This is a native feature. This is the retina and fingerprint. So, you know, on iOS's with the button or with the new iPhone X models, the 10 models, we have the retina. We have that integrated built into our app. So what you can see here is if I have this element set up, this is just a little Touch ID button, and we drop these in as the images. If I do tapped on this, you'll see that all I had to do to authenticate with Touch ID was to add one action, authenticate. It's literally going to the tap gesture, adding a new one, adding this authentication gesture, and you'll see that you get successes. So if there's a successful authentication, so if they check the face or the fingerprint and everything's good, then do something. We create, for our demo app, we create a little Firebase event to know that the Face ID succeeded. We submit it, and we run an API test to get that token because we know that they're good to go. We know that everything's worked out. If the Face ID fails, then we actually are doing a Firebase event just to let us know that that Face ID did fail, and then we submit that event as well. So it's pretty cool to be able to add such advanced functionality with simply just kind of dropping in an action. So we've got the app. I've got elements placed. They're constrained. I've got events to get into to trigger actions. I can create those actions. I have an API to be able to allow me to pull in data, to post data to our backend, and to be able to manipulate dynamic data in our apps. So the next thing that we need to worry about is testing and debugging. So what's really awesome about our framework is we have a built-in web simulator so you can test. So if I were to test, first thing I can do is I have two options. If I click this little icon that shows a little monitor right here, it gives us different test configurations. I've got the web simulator. So I can build, when I go to test this, I will build the app project on the backside and run it through a web simulator that's built right into the browser. The other thing I can do is if I'm a premium member, is that I can actually email that brand new build to my email address with a link that allows me to download it right from my test device. So you can test it on, if you have multiple devices or you want to check out screen sizes and UI layouts, you can go ahead and just send it to a mobile device. Tap that email, download your app, and give it a shot. It's really awesome functionality built right in. So I have it set up for the web simulator, and then I would hit test. Test will then run a little script on the backside. It's building out, it's compiling the app, it's taking everything we've done in the editor and building out the native lines of code in an iOS app that's written in Swift, and in the Android app that's written in Java, and it'll spit out and it'll create that compiled app. Once that happens, it'll say it's successful, and I would hit the little builds tab here, and you'll see that I have some tested out here for speed in our demo, that you can see that I have a web simulator that was built successfully. Here's a little build ID if you ever need to reach out to support and they ask for more details on being able to troubleshoot an app, for instance. They might ask for the build ID. It lives right here, and this is kind of the key for support to be able to get in and look at what you're looking at. At that point, you can just do test in web simulator. So if I test in web simulator, it pops up literally an iPhone screen right here. You can change the sizes if you want to see it there. We even have a network activity tab. So if I click this, the network log will pop up. And as I show you, as I run the app, API requests are happening, and we can record and see the data that's in the transmission. It's like we're sniffing the packets built right into the browser's test suite as well. So if I hit tap to play here, it's going to load the app. It's grabbing that source code, installing the app into this digital browser. It's popping it in, and we slide right into our first screen. Now, we didn't go to the screen because we weren't fully logged in yet. So what was going on there was it was going to that main page, realizing we didn't have a good token, so we slid over to our login page. So I'm going to drop in our little demo account, log in here, and I'll go ahead and just enter an incorrect password. And you'll see that if I go to log in, failed to log in, so we've told it that on a bad password. But also look over here, you can notice it right there. Token, password, you can see it's incorrect. I received a 400 back. In our app, we're taking advantage of that 400 and displaying an error and telling them you failed to log in. Do you want to try again? And we can see this all while we're documenting and we're testing these apps for success. So if I go back in, delete this, and type in correct password, and I do log in with Salesforce, you'll see it logs in. Look, I get a 200, so I get a positive one. We're verifying the password. We're getting the token. Everything's moving through. We went to the next page, and you'll see our client page. So now the table's all filled in with the dynamic data that came in. You can see the images are right here as they're being pulled in from the API. Pretty awesome. At that point, I can go ahead and select one of our clients, for instance. You'll slide right in. I've got an image of the client that came in from the request. Look at all these tiles. This is pretty wild. When Apple Maps is being created and showing you the maps based on the address, all the little tiles for the map come in, and you can see that working as well. At this point, one thing that we have built into these clients for the demo app is to be able to show a video. We have the ability to show video right in the app. So if I hit the play button right here, it'll slide right into the next page, which is a native video player that is playing the app. On the simulator right here, the sound isn't quite there. If you do it on a mobile device, you'll be able to hear it, but the video will start playing right here. You can scrub, go back 15 seconds, just all the native functions that we're used to, for instance, if you were in a YouTube app. Full screens, volume controls, it's all built in. You didn't have to do any of this. You just said, play this video. And it's like, yeah, I've got it. And it pops open the screen and plays the video for you. No coding necessary. I can close it. I've got directions. If this was on an actual device where I had the GPS location of my device, I could do get directions, and this will move it into the Apple Maps app and actually use the native functionality that you have built into these devices to give you good driving directions or walking directions or transit, what have you. You can even integrate Intercom into your app. So we have the Intercom button here, and you can have live chat built right into your app. So if you had a means where you needed to communicate in your app with your business team, you could leverage Intercom for something like that. Slide back. Submit leads, so we use the tab bar for that, and then I have another one right there where I can fill out the information for submitting a lead and then passing that information in. The last thing I want to show you here is I'm going to close out the browser and show you you've tested your app, everything's working out fine, the API is working great, everything's functioning, it's time to deploy. If you go over here and you do a mobile device build, you can test it on an actual device, but after that, it's time to deploy. As you're building out your app, you might find that this is the build I want to deploy from. I might want to build a little bit later some more functionality for maybe version 2, but this is the version that I want deployed. At that point, you simply will hit deploy this build, submit it to the App Store, and this will walk you through a pathway where at this point, you can either start to begin to do it yourself, or you can use the convenience of Dropsource to help you deploy the app for you if you're unsure about how this goes about. It's a little bit more of a premium feature, but we will walk you through and actually do a lot of the work for you to deploy the app. If you download the source code, it's exactly what will happen. If I hit next and I let it know why, so it's like, you want to download the source code? It says, okay, well, why? It's like, well, maybe I want to test the app, or maybe I want to publish the app. When I hit download, it will start downloading right here into your downloads folder, whatever you have set up on your computer. And that is the app that can be opened up using Apple's Xcode software or Android Studio for the Android side. It's as easy as that. You also have your full source code. So at that point, you can deploy the app yourself if you're more confident in it and you want to take advantage of that feature yourself. You're also in the spot where you have the ability to see the code. The app is on your screen. Everything that we've done behind the scenes is now in a folder on your computer that you can open up and visually see the code. Add to it, tweak it, test it, experiment it if you like to. It's all yours. And that's essentially what I wanted to show you. I know that that's a ton of information, and we're going to do some Q&A here to help answer some questions. I have to move quick because there's a lot to show you. Our platform is absolutely incredible with what it can do and the simplicity that it is to build these apps and walk through the process of getting from point A to point B with a mobile app at your disposal. So while I welcome you to drop some questions into the chat, and we're going to do some Q&A here. And while you're dropping those questions, I just want to show you a couple other things that we have built into the Dropsource experience that's going to help you along. Let me slide this down. I'll do a new tab. First thing I want to show you is help.dropsource.com. We have an entire suite, and we have an on-site education specialist who is so good at breaking down the steps, creating documentation, creating tutorials, and walking you through, and video examples and everything to get you familiar and comfortable with using Dropsource. We go right in here with a welcome guide. A lot of what I talked about is built into this, showing you the layout, how you can do things, and how you move from page to page and everything. You can see the tabs are on the left-hand side, and each one breaks it down. Making API requests, writing your spec file. These are all built in here, and they're all at your access. This is all free. Tutorials are in here, and we've got example apps. You can click on the checklist app, for instance. If you have a single screen app, you're like, yeah, I need a checklist style app. Walk through the tutorial and ask any questions that you have in the forum. And that's the second place I wanted to show you. If we go to forum.dropsource.com, we have an incredibly vibrant community of Dropsource developers that are in here. We're all working together. Support's in here. The other Dropsource developers are in here. We pose questions, we ask them, we create banter and chat in here, and we're all learning together and just trying to get everybody to be able to realize their app ambitions, be able to build out anything they want. Maybe they came from Bubble. I think a few of you are probably Bubble users as well that came over to check out this webinar. We have breakdowns of how you integrate that Bubble app. What are some of the constraints that happen when you use two spots? Do you need native functionality outside of just a web view? We answer these questions in here, and this is a great spot to come to ask some questions and to read and to collaborate with the other Dropsource developers while you're building your app as we all learn together. So between the forum, the support that you have in chat, the help resources and the tutorials, we really have a large welcoming ecosystem to help support you in your endeavors using our editor. And with that, that's really the end of the demo. I'd like to open it up to a Q&A and be able to answer any questions and point out anything in the app that you have a question on and walk you through it in a little bit more of granular detail. Rebecca?
Awesome. Thank you, Wade.
Yeah.
So we do have some questions rolling in. One that we had was, what was the website name to generate importable API files?
Okay, so yep, let me pop this down. There's a little window here that kind of hides my tab bar. So I'm going to slide that down. I hope that doesn't mess up anything. So if you go to stoplight.io, this is a fantastic website to help you build out your API. You essentially go in and create your account, and it starts asking you some details of your back end. You start filling it in. And then using what you've set up with the back end, be it a third-party backend, or maybe you have your own server, maybe you have your internal database and you want to bring some of that company data into this new app so that you can function it better. This is where you start documenting those pathways, the URLs that you're going to go to, what parameters are required and what types they are. and then what responses we're going to get back. And then at this point, you'll use Stoplight.io to create essentially the rules of the road of your backend, your API, and then you'll hit a button and it'll create a document for you, and that is called the Swagger spec file, the open API spec file, which breaks it down in a really nice readable way for a human to be able to use, but also that's what you upload in the drop source, and that's how it knows what URL requests are at my disposal, how I get to them, what information it needs in order to work, what response I can expect to get back.
Great, and so we have a few more questions about APIs that we'll go through. Sure. And please, everyone who's attending, submit your questions into the Q&A panel. We're happy to answer anything you might put in there, so please go ahead and put those in. So another question about APIs is what kind of API authentication schemes are currently supported, what's not supported, ETA on when to see unsupported ones?
That's a good question. So Nate's probably a little bit better to answer an in-depth question when it comes to auth abilities in our app. Nate, do you have input on more specificity when it comes to the auth?
Yeah, for authentication, we support basic authentication. So basically through the header, sending a basic authorization token. We also have support for generic API key authentication. So that sends an API key through the header or through the query parameter. And we also have some basic support for some OAuth flows. So specifically the OAuth password flow. OAuth password flow essentially sends a bearer authorization token through the header. So those are very common authentication schemes in mobile. Something that we don't support currently is the OAuth implicit flow, which typically is done through like single sign-on and for other custom parts like that. But we usually do those on a customer basis, just because those are highly customizable.
Nice.
Great. And so one more, what's the recommended way to update the API within Dropsource?
So when you're updating their API, and that'll happen often as you're developing it out, because a lot of times you're trying to get concise calls and custom calls that you might need in specific spots in your app. So a lot of times what customers will do is you'll go ahead and you'll re-upload your API. When you do that, let's say that you deleted some fields and things like that. For instance, if I go into the parameters and the query, let's say that like in the query, let's say for instance in this one, I didn't actually need the grant type. Let's just say for example, when you were refactoring your API to essentially set the rule up that you were creating this query and you don't need the grant type, you'd make the adjustment there. You'd end up spitting out a brand new Swagger spec file, and then you'll upload that. And Dropsource is smart enough to see what's going on, and it'll actually remove and actually, I believe it puts a red dot immediately saying, I see your update. I realize that grant type is no longer necessary.
Great. And so more questions rolling in. Please keep them coming, everyone who's on the webinar. If you have more questions, enter them into the Q&A. So a couple about Dropsource itself. What's the file size compared to writing code?
That's a good question. Nate, I believe we're probably about the same when you say, or maybe a little bit larger due to frameworks?
Yeah, it really depends. I mean, we're pretty much in line with if you were to do it by hand. If you're using packages like PayPal or Facebook or Firebase, your app size will be a little bit bigger because we do have to include those frameworks, but it should be relatively in line with what you'd expect from coding yourself.
I'm in a decent internet connection, and for instance, this screen, I mean, this isn't such a lightweight app, even for a demo app. There's quite a bit of functionality going on here, and I'm able to download this in seconds. When I go to download the source code option and pull it in, it's seconds.
Great, and another one, do we have plans to support offline apps?
Yeah, so we're building out greater technology to be able to handle offline support, to be able to have local storage of the data that's coming in and be able to use it in offline situations. We're still speccing that out and building it out, but if you're following forum and our emails, you're learning that it is coming and we're building it out, yes.
And with that, I think a good follow-up is, can you talk about the security of the platform?
The security of the platform. I'm not sure where we're going with that.
I think with the data that's being integrated and used inside the platform, kind of what's the security parameters around that?
Gotcha. Like, is there app secure in our platform? Yeah. Nate, can you speak on the security of where the apps are being like stored and how secure we are with the data that's going on?
Can you provide some more?
Yes, I think if we can talk about maybe how the information is hosted from someone else's backend, so it's secured as their backend, just kind of overall, what you put into it is the security you're getting out of it.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, so I mean, from the app's perspective, the app can only be as secure as your backend. So, we always recommend that you make sure that your backend is connecting over HTTPS. If that happens, then all the code we generate for your mobile networking will be secure. So that's the biggest thing. Other mobile security that you want to keep in mind is with file storage. So if you're ever downloading files to the device that are sensitive, making sure to delete them after you download them, which we have actions for that. And then for storing data offline, if you're ever storing data that's sensitive on the device, you want to make sure to handle that accordingly. So if you don't want it to persist between sessions, then making sure to clear those values out. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if that answered the question correctly or not.
So another one we have is talking about plugins, what plugins are available, what might be available coming down the line with plugins. You want to kind of discuss that?
Let me show you here. If I highlight the button in the login with Salesforce, for instance, just to get into any sort of event where I can add an action, we are very heavily plugin integrated. So in this tap event, this is a plugin here showing the overlay action, running the API request. If I hit plus and add another one to it, for instance, there's a plethora of plugins that we have built in here. You can go as simple as set a value, for instance. So setting a value to, let's say you had a page variable, some sort of Boolean that you needed to keep track of. This is where you could go ahead and set it. You could set that value separately. But I mean, it can get all the way into, for instance, location, reverse geocoding a location, right? So you might have the address and you need to get into the GPS coordinates. You could build it out there. This might be where you start tracking a location, right? You have GPS coordinates and you can start using the maps to start tracking locations, creating location objects on a map, things like that. And there's even calculate distance formulas built in here. Here's the authentication with the retina and the face ID, adding a pin to a map. And really there is a ton of them. Even audio sessions are able to be built in with the AV player. If you go into and create a demo app there and you're cruising through, just go into the actions, just kind of scroll down and see what's really at your disposal. There is a ton of functionality built in with these plugins. And as we keep moving forward, we're listening to our community members that are explaining things that they wish are there. And then as we get more push towards needing to implement a new plugin that our customers want to integrate and leverage, we take that into consideration, move it forward with the timeline of what we also need on, say, the enterprise end as well. So there's always greater functionality on the way. Yes.
Wonderful. And so another maybe a little more in-depth question that came through, can you discuss how Dropsource works with Bubble in terms of data, especially if using it with the web view style rather than building it within Dropsource?
I think I misunderstood the question. Can you say that one more time, please?
Yeah, so discuss how Dropsource works with Bubble in terms of data, especially if using the web view style rather than building it within Dropsource.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, so there's a couple ways. So for instance, there's some spots where we're limited when it comes to web views and what we can do, but then what a lot of Bubble users will do is they'll start to leverage the API's ability to create that spec file. So for instance, if you have a web view and you take it to your Bubble site and you have your Bubble app popped up in a web view, If you want to go to a page and pass some parameters, we have the web view, so we have the URL. So we could pass some parameters using the URL to be able to pass strings through it. That bubble can use to, to show things accordingly or do functionality on the back end or on the bubble app for whatever's about to be displayed next. But let's say that you need something better or maybe something more secure. Maybe they're logging in, for instance. This is a great spot where native functionality starts to play a role. If you're logging in, you probably don't want to put that username and password built into the URL parameter that you're going to send on. Now, maybe you want to use HTTPS, but if you know what's going on out there, you know that that's not necessarily the most secure way to be able to send a login. Well, this is spots where the native functionality you can start to leverage. Your bubble has a back end, and you can create a new route that would be, for instance, an API request that, say, Dropsource did outside of that web view that required parameters of username and password. For instance, those strings would be set up in the body of the request instead of the header of the request. That's a great spot where using HTTPS and being able to encrypt that and send it on in an encrypted manner, that's great spots where bubble users will a lot of times use what they've built in their bubble app to immediately leverage their bubble app using a web view in a mobile app. But then there's spots where it makes sense to be able to take advantage of the native style to be able to send an API request with more functionality than you necessarily get with a web URL. And that's where it really gets really cool when you have a bubble app and you want to integrate it in a mobile platform. We can use a lot of what you've already done in the web view while also being able to extend your app, add more information, create things that are more secure, create payments, things like that in a more native, mobile-friendly style framework as well. And I think that that's an incredible advantage that you get when you come from building out something that you had as a web app in the beginning and be able to mobilize it using native features. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I think that's kind of wrapping up most of the questions. If you guys have more questions for us, of course, please feel free to reach out, Wade to the forum. There's definitely a lot of options for getting a hold of us. And if you have any last minute questions, put them into the Q&A now, and we will try to get to them. Wade, anything else? If not, I'm going to...
That's what I've got there. Feel free to take the
Okay. Yeah, so everybody just wanted to pop up. We mentioned the Forrester Wave, and I'm about to put into the chat. Sorry, just trying to get to it. I'm going to put into the chat a link. One, I know there were some questions about sample apps, so here's a link to some sample apps. We mentioned the Forrester Wave. I'm going to put a link into the chat for that as well. If you guys want to learn more about Dropsource, we'd love to talk to you one-on-one, get a feel for what your use case is, and help you get started creating a mobile app. So there are links in the chat for all of those things, and we will definitely be sending out the recording after this session. So thank you all for joining us. We hope that you learned a lot from our session, and we look forward to seeing you in Dropsource and in our next webinar. Thank you, guys. We will send the recording out very soon.